AP Environmental Science students, welcome to this lecture on the nitrogen cycle. This PowerPoint covers two topics. The first one is 1.5, the nitrogen cycle. The learning objective is explain the steps and reservoir interactions of the nitrogen cycle. The second topic that we're going to be looking at is topic 8.5, eutrophication. The enduring understanding for this, human activities, including the use of resources, have physical, chemical, and biological consequences for ecosystem. One of those consequences is eutrophication, and that's the major one for the nitrogen cycle. And then the learning objective, explain the environmental effects of excessive use of fertilizer and detergents on aquatic systems. And as usual, we'll get to the enduring understandings at the end, but for now, the vocab. What I want you guys to do is pause this now and jot down the vocab. And I'm just going to jump right into the cycle. So where we're going to start is in the atmosphere. Nitrogen gas is diatomic nitrogen, two nitrogen atoms with a triple bond holding them together. That triple bond is extremely strong, and it is very difficult, if not impossible, for most organisms to break. Plants, animals cannot do anything with that. Fungi can't do anything with atmospheric nitrogen. The only organisms that can do anything with atmospheric nitrogen are what we call nitrogen-fixing bacteria. And nitrogen-fixing bacteria can be found in two places, or at least two places that we'll talk about. They can be found in the soil, and they can be found in the root nodules of some plants. Okay? There's many different species of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. We're just going to talk about them all as a group. And what they do is they take atmospheric nitrogen and they turn atmospheric nitrogen into ammonia. Right? So ammonium is the end product of this. They get energy from that. They break this triple bond and they release a lot of energy from it, and that energy is used to power their metabolism. And the byproduct of that is this ammonium. Okay, so I said that they can be found in two places. They could be free living in the soil, and that's where we're going to focus on most for the rest of this cycle, but they can also be found in the root nodules of some plants, most notably legumes. Legumes include peas, beans, soybeans, broad beans, cowpeas, green peas, pinto beans, black beans, kidney beans, navy beans, any of the beans that we think of. But they also include a lot of other plants that we don't think of. They also include a lot of wildflowers and shrubs and even trees. All right. Legumes are found in, or legumes are family Fabaceae, which is not one of your vocab words. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. Not one of your vocab words, but the pea and bean family, and is one of the largest plant families in the world. And they are extremely successful because they can take, because they have these nitrogen-fixing bacteria living in these little bulbous nodules, these little glands, not necessarily glands, but these nodules on their roots. And those nitrogen-fixing bacteria form a symbiotic relationship with the plant. They take atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into ammonium, which the plant can use as a form of fertilizer, or it can be converted into nitrates, which the plant can use as a fertilizer. And the plant will provide them sugars through the process of photosynthesis and a home to live in. All right. So peas, beans, alfalfa, clover, extremely important, and we'll talk about them a lot when we talk about land use, specifically for agriculture. Okay. So getting back to the soil, they can also live in the soil. These nitrogen-fixing bacteria can live in the soil as well. And those free-living ones in the soil are not working with a symbiotic relationship with plants. They're just kind of doing their own thing, and they make ammonium. Okay, that process is called nitrogen fixation. Okay, so what they are doing here with this arrow is nitrogen fixation. Okay, they are fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere into an aqueous form that is found in the soil, this NH4, this ammonium. Other bacteria, these nitrifying bacteria, will go through a process or do a process called nitrification, which will turn this ammonium into nitrites. Nitrites are poisonous to plants. Nitrites are toxic to plants. They cannot use them. But luckily for plants, nitrites are quickly converted into nitrates by more nitrifying bacteria. Okay, we don't need to get into how many species are involved and the different species and the names of those species. We'll just say nitrifying bacteria convert ammonium to nitrites, and then from nitrites to nitrates, and that entire process is nitrification. Okay, nitrates are what plants prefer. Okay, nitrates are the preferable plant fertilizer, preferable plant food. Okay, and they will take that up through their roots. So roots, and assimilate that into their tissues. So assimilation is plants bringing nitrates in and assimilating it into their tissues. They're making proteins, amino acids, they're making DNA, RNA, nucleic acids. Okay? So amino acids and nucleic acids are what they're making with this nitrates. They're also making a host of what we call secondary metabolites. Secondary metabolites are plant products that are used for all kinds of purposes, from scent to chemical signaling to anti-herbivory to toxins, and plants use those for a variety of reasons. Okay, but nitrogen is also important for that. Plants get eaten by animals, and those animals bring that nitrogen, especially from the proteins, into their own bodies, and they'll take amino acids and break down the protein and reuse those amino acids to form their own proteins. Okay, so this rabbit is eating the plants, and it is assimilating all of that nitrogen from the plant, from the amino acids, the secondary metabolites, the nucleic acids, into its own tissues. Some animals will eat other animals. A hawk will eat this rabbit, and that hawk will get all of its nitrogen from this rabbit, okay, or from its diet of rabbits, its steady diet of rabbits. So nitrogen will therefore go up the food chain. So we'll go from producers to primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, etc., and that nitrogen will go up and up and up. Some of that nitrogen gets excreted as waste, either in the form of solid waste or liquid waste. And all plants die, all animals die, and eventually that waste, the animal bodies, the plant bodies, will be decomposed. Decomposers will take the nitrogen that's in the form of proteins, nucleic acids, break them down back into ammonium, and return that to the soil. So once it's in a biotic form, this nitrogen can just cycle through these various stages and just go around and around and around until eventually that nitrogen will exit out. And when it exits out, what I'm saying is that it's going back into the atmosphere by denitrifying bacteria. These denitrifying bacteria, just like the nitrogen fixing bacteria, get their energy from breaking this triple bond in atmospheric nitrogen and turning that atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. These denitrifying bacteria get their energy from turning nitrates back into atmospheric nitrogen. Okay, and that completes the cycle. In aquatic systems, it's basically the same. We have free-living bacteria that are nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they will convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium. That ammonium will go through the process of nitrification by different species of bacteria to form nitrates. And then those nitrates will be assimilated. It says consumption here, but I'm going to use the term assimilated by phytoplankton, algae, marine plants, aquatic plants. So those nitrates are essentially, again, plant food getting assimilated into those producers' tissues. They will get consumed, go up the food chain, and again, everything will die, everything has waste, and all of that detritus down at the bottom of the ocean will decompose, and it will decompose and turn the turn the amino acids, the nucleic acids, the secondary metabolites, anything else that contains nitrogen back to ammonium. The decomposers, the fungi and bacteria in the soils or in the water will do that, and then you can create the cycle or replenish the cycle. The other part with the marine system is that you have detritus entering the water. That could be dead leaves, it could be animal waste, but any way that something land-based enters into the marine system is adding nitrogen to that marine system. One of the major ones that humans are adding are nitrogen-containing fertilizers. All right, plus animal waste like from our livestock and from raw sewage. Any of that entering the water adds more nitrogen into this cycle in the water. So that leads us to some human impacts of the nitrogen cycle. The first is the Haber-Bosch process. So before the 20th century, all the nitrogen and all of the soils and all the water on the planet came from ultimately nitrogen-fixing bacteria turning diatomic atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium and then through the processes of nitrification. Those nitrogen-fixing bacteria were responsible for all of the nitrogen in all the soils and all the aquatic systems on the planet. That means that if a farmer wanted to increase the fertility of their soil, they had to either plant legumes and turn those into the soil because, till them into the soil so they would decompose in the soil and add the nitrogen into the soil that way, or they would have to use animal waste to improve the soil. In the early 1900s, a couple German chemists, Haber and Bosch, I believe one was more of a chemist and one was more of a businessman, developed a process to convert atmospheric nitrogen into ammonium synthetically. That was initially used for explosives during World War I, but is mostly used for fertilizers today. That is resulting in more nitrogen in the biosphere, which is destabilizing natural systems because most systems, or all systems, all natural systems, evolved in such a way that they evolved for a specific amount of nitrogen, right? There's a specific level of nitrogen in each soil and each aquatic system, and the ecosystem was balanced with that. As we add fertilizers, we have some negative consequences, including changing soil chemistry, changing water chemistry, and most importantly, cultural eutrophication. Okay. Before we get into what cultural eutrophication is, the next one is burning fossil fuels. So by burning fossil fuels, especially in internal combustion engines where there's high temperatures and high pressures, that can produce nitrogen monoxide, and that can quickly get converted into nitrogen dioxide, which is a major contributor of smog and is a greenhouse gas. Okay, but let's get back to cultural eutrophication. So eutrophication is a series of steps, and it's a series of steps that is natural in aquatic systems, but we're going to stick with it for right now. We'll get to the natural process when we talk about ecosystems and succession, but for right now, we'll just talk about cultural eutrophication. Say that you have somebody applying fertilizer, nitrogen-containing fertilizer, nitrogen-heavy fertilizer to their crops, to their golf course. Say that you have raw sewage being entered or put into a waterway. Say that you have animal waste in like a pigsty, and then you have a heavy rain that washes all that to the ocean. You have a heavy rain that washes fertilizer from your golf course, from your lawn, from your agricultural field into a creek, into a river, into a lake. Okay? So somehow you're going to have fertilizers or animal waste getting into an aquatic system. All right, that's step one. Step two, those fertilizers, those nutrients, are going to be used by algae in the water. Algae are the fastest growing single-celled or multicellular algae are the fastest growing organisms in that water. They're the fastest growing producers, and they will outcompete plants, seagrasses, even kelp in that water. Okay, they, as you can see on like the top right or on the far right, they will shade out all of the bottom dwelling plants, all of the benthic plants. Okay, they will outcompete them. that huge spike in algae population is going to quickly use all those nutrients. So you have a one-time influx of nutrients, those algae explode in population size, you have an algal bloom, and you quickly use up all those nutrients. All those algae are going to die because they don't have any nitrogen, they don't have the phosphates or whatever to use. The lack of the nutrients is going to cause their death. Okay, you're going to have a massive decrease in population size, but you're going to have a feast for the decomposers. The decomposers in that water are going to consume or decompose all of those algae, and the aerobic decomposers are going to use all the dissolved oxygen that's in that water. Okay, so there's going to be a set amount of dissolved oxygen in this water, and those decomposers are going to use it all because they're working overtime, working really quickly, and they have a massive population increase. That water is therefore going to become hypoxic, meaning low oxygen, or anoxic, meaning no oxygen. Okay, so the root word hypo means low, and the root an means no. All right, that's going to lead to the death of many species, most notably fish, but also mollusks, crustaceans, and pretty much most things. You'll have some worms that are able to survive in anoxic conditions. A couple fish will survive in hypoxic conditions like catfish, but most fish and most other marine and aquatic animals will die. So the steps real briefly, you're going to have an influx of nutrients. That's going to lead to a massive algal bloom. Those algae are going to use up all those nutrients and all die. When they die, the decomposers are going to have a massive spike in population size, and they're going to use up all of the dissolved oxygen in that water, especially if it's still water. And then that's going to result in hypoxic or anoxic conditions, which are going to kill off most life in that lake, that pond, that pool, or even that section of the ocean. So this is just a diagram showing that you have an influx of those nutrients, whether that's nitrogen or phosphorus. That's going to lead to increase in phytoplankton and algae. They are going to create this algal bloom, which just means that you have a massive increase in algae size, population size. They're going to die, they're going to decay, and those decomposers are going to use up all of the oxygen in that system. That's going to lead to the death of most of the species in that area. So eutrophication really is the major impact of the nitrogen cycle that we're going to discuss, some effects of cultural eutrophication. And while I am thinking about it, cultural eutrophication versus eutrophication. You can use the two terms interchangeably on the AP test, but what the difference is that eutrophication is, if you just say eutrophication and you're talking about it in a natural process, eutrophication is just a natural process. Cultural eutrophication, though, is when you're talking about it being caused by human activity. So humans are the ones causing cultural eutrophication. Most people will drop the cultural part of it and just leave it with eutrophication, and everybody knows what they mean. But cultural eutrophication specifically means humans. When you're using eutrophication, technically it means just a natural process. All right, the natural process of eutrophication, which does naturally happen in ponds and lakes over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. But anyway, the effects of eutrophication are cultural eutrophication. First off, these algae are going to block the light from everything, all the producers beneath them, so you're not going to have seagrasses or kelp or anything like that beneath them. A lot of the algae produce toxins, which can be released and kill fish and other life. A great example is the red tide that happened in Tampa, Florida in 2021, where over 600 tons of dead fish and marine mammals washed up on Tampa Bay's shores, or the shores all up and down the west coast of Florida, and that was due to this red algae that produces toxins that are highly deadly or very deadly to fish. Hypoxic and anoxic waters. Again, low oxygen or no oxygen will lead to the death of any species that requires oxygen. So again, back to the learning objectives, the essential knowledge. Nitrogen is the movement of atoms and molecules containing the element nitrogen between sources and sinks. Okay, we talked about each step in that cycle, and you guys should be familiar with each step in that cycle. Okay. Most of the reservoirs in which nitrogen compounds occur in the nitrogen cycle hold those compounds for relatively short periods of time. We didn't really mention that, but if you think back to that cycle, they're staying in those organisms for a relatively short period of time. They're going to be in the soil for a relatively short period of time before they get brought up by plants. They're going to be in plants for a relatively short period of time. Even if it's a couple thousand years that some plants live, it's a relatively short period of time. Animals, definitely a short period of time. Nitrogen gets cycled really, really quickly until it gets up into the atmosphere, in which case it can stay for quite a while. Nitrogen fixation is the process in which atmospheric nitrogen is converted into a form of nitrogen, primarily ammonia, that is available for uptake by plants and can be synthesized into plant tissue. I should mention it that ammonia is NH3, ammonium ending in UM is NH4+. I pretty much just said ammonium, but you can use the two interchangeably because ammonia will readily get a hydrogen atom and become ammonia. All right. And then finally, the atmosphere is the major reservoir of nitrogen. That's where most of the nitrogen on the planet is, and most of the atmosphere is nitrogen. About 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Nitrogen gas, diatomic nitrogen. All right, and again, the major human impact on the nitrogen cycle is eutrophication. So eutrophication occurs when a body of water is enriched in nutrients. That specifically here was nitrogen, but it could be phosphorus, it could be animal or human waste. Okay, raw sewage or animal fecal matter. All right. The increase in nutrients in eutrophication causes an algal bloom. When the algal bloom dies, microbes digest the algae along with the oxygen in the water, leading to a decrease in the dissolved oxygen levels in the water. The lack of dissolved oxygen can result in large die-offs of fish and other aquatic organisms. Anything that requires dissolved oxygen in that water can die. Hypoxic waterways are those bodies of water that are low in dissolved oxygen. A similar term would be anoxic, which is no oxygen, no dissolved oxygen. And then compared to eutrophic waterways, oligotrophic waterways have very low amounts of nutrients, stable algal populations, and dissolved oxygen. We're not even going to talk about those now, but we will talk about those that learning objective later when we talk about succession. And then, so that's the only one that we did not talk about. And then anthropogenic causes of eutrophication or agricultural runoff and wastewater release. What I wanted to give you guys the eutrophication point now for is these top ones. Basically, what is the process of eutrophication? We will talk about this last one at great length later on. And to be honest, this one right here we'll talk about, but you won't often see, especially not compared to the other ones. All right, so I hope that you guys learned something. I'll see you on class.